People are applying to ghost jobs. Companies are getting ghost applicants. Like, it's just kind of like a wild world out there. And so that can be like really disheartening and frustrating.
There comes a time in all of our careers, whether we're entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, hiring executives, employees, that we have to decide how we will make changes. Challenges will come, but changes are often necessary. And because we consider ourselves to be creatures of habit, we feel as if transformation is so difficult. And we go out kicking and screaming, I've done it. And we beat ourselves up. And then we get to the other side of it because we don't know what's on the other side of these deep pivots, these hard interruptions. And we're like, wow, if that didn't happen, then this wouldn't have happened. Ever been there? This is what our conversation is going to be about today, how to prepare yourself mentally for hard pivots and transformations. But not only that, understanding that sometimes they're necessary. It won't be the situation throwing you reasons that you pivot. It'll be you consciously making the decision on making this U-turn, changing careers, jumping from a bad business, building a new business, moving out of one state to another. Whatever life is throwing at you, we're going to help give you some tools that you can navigate through better. My name is NaRon Tillman. This is Walk in Victory, and we sit you at the feet of the masters to give you conversations to help you evolve your life. And today's master is Carlee. How are we doing?
Good. I'm excited to be here. So thanks so much for having me.
No, thank you so much for coming. When you hear transformation or pivoting, what's the first things that come to your mind?
New possibilities.
Mm,
That's the first thing that came to my mind. But then I think the second thing that came to my mind was everything you said, right? A little bit of maybe a little bit of fear, maybe a little bit of excitement, maybe a little bit of what could it be? But yeah, that was my first reaction.
so you've had a wide range of different career paths, and that actually gives you the wisdom to have this conversation. Tell our audience a little bit about what it is that you have encountered in your journey and why you think that having these conversations are important.
Yeah. So I've spent my career in HR doing like leadership development and org effectiveness. So that kind of shapes out as like leadership development, how people perform at work, engagement, culture, all these kinds of things. And I've done that in for profit and nonprofit, and I've also done consulting. And I'd say in the years that I've been working, my big pivots with career have really also have not just been in job opportunities, sort of like moving within that space, but also the life moves that have come with that. I've been in a lot of different cities, and those pivots and turns are big, and they weren't taken lightly with me and making those career moves. And so if anyone's ever moved in their lives, they know what this looks like, which is you're uprooting your community, you're starting all over. Maybe this is also why people haven't moved, because they're like, how do I even begin and what do I do? So I think that's a big part of my pivot and turn journey. The other part of it is, you mentioned like different facets of my career. I've also spent 20 years coaching volleyball. I've done that in all shapes and sizes and different age groups and in different types of facilities, right? Indoor, outdoor, beach, all the above. And today I still work in the volleyball community. I work with sitting volleyball, which is an adaptive sport. And so it's the best way to describe it. It's in at least where I support is in the pipelines on the way to the national team. And if you're not in the sports lingo, that really is for athletes that go to the Paralympics. And if you don't know what that is, that's my other fun fact that I'll leave you with, which is I recommend Googling or YouTubing sitting volleyball. You can look up the latest Paris Paralympics. So, and that's just another moment of a pivot. I got into that because someone asked if I wanted to coach. I didn't know what I was doing. In fact, I had very little to do with volleyball other than recreation growing up. But they gave me an opportunity. I was like, I guess, yeah, I'll do it. And they're like, we'll help you. I was like, okay. And if you talk about a scary move where you don't know what you're doing, like try staring a bunch of like 15-year-olds in the eyes and basically saying you don't know what you're doing, they probably know more about the sport than you do. And I got into it, but listen, it's still something I do today, and I'm very involved, in the community and still, like I said, supporting sitting volleyball. So that's a big part of me and my pivots. And the other one is, I mentioned moving. I live in Baltimore, Maryland right now, and I'm really involved in the community, and I take what I do in my HR world and bring that into Baltimore. So I work for the city of Baltimore in the Workforce Development Board, also serve on nonprofit boards. So all that to say, right, our careers can look very different. They can build on one another. I think there's also a part of career development and pivoting that sort of, I don't know if aging like fine wine is a thing, because I don't think you like pivot or like do anything abrupt once things are aging. So maybe like that's not the right. We need like a version of that that works, because
Yeah.
I think there's pieces that when we think about careers and life, it builds on each other, right? We learn from our past, and we also use what we've learned to hopefully propel us as we move forward. So long answer to your question, but I think it's because it's enriching and it's a lot, and it's not anything small, and it's my
No,
life.
and it's I'm glad that you are transparent. You know, most people have a problem with sharing and how difficult things are. We always hear the stories about to overcome. Oh yeah, and I just did this, and I just and the infomercial. All you got to do is send $10, and then you get the stuff in the box, and it's not
Oh
nothing
yeah.
like this.
Yep.
so, so that's almost what happens in these podcast interviews, that people don't like to be vulnerable. And one of the things that we pride ourselves in is pushing those questions, not to draw to people's pain, but so that the listener can understand that everyone has a journey, and everyone's journey is going to have ups, downs, bends, turns, circles, and all of those things. And it's the value that we learn while we're on that journey. So
Mhm.
now you're
Yeah.
podcasting, and this is another part of your journey, right? You're podcasting,
Yeah.
and you're going out and you're telling your story. What provoked you to want to do that? What provokes you to say, you know what, I have something to share, and I want to be able to
Yeah.
share it?
Yeah. I think it's two things. One is careers. I think that making career moves can be really difficult. And like you said, and when you're looking around, sometimes you see like the shiny object, like the completion of someone's career or the moment they're in, but there's so much that sits behind that in
Mhm.
getting there. And I think right now it's really, really difficult. Like there's a lot of disruptions in work, AI, for example. I think there's a lot of brokenness when you look at like recruiting, right? People are applying to ghost jobs. Companies are getting ghost applicants. Like it's just kind of like a wild world out there. And so that can be like really disheartening and frustrating. And I talk to people, I mean, I'm sure we all have friends that are applying or looking for jobs and can speak to this. And it can put ourselves in like literally in question, right? Like, am I good enough for these things? So for me, that's part of the messaging that I wanted to get out and talk about, which is continue to pursue the things that matter to you, that are important to your values, that are important to where you want to move in life and in your career. No, it's not easy, and you and I are talking about some of that today, but it's worth it in the end because we spend so much time at work. The other thing that I've been enjoying talking about in podcasts is also like the power of community, right? We spend so much of our time at work, and one, sometimes work's not always like holistically fulfilling, like in terms of impact and where we want to see like our craft go to work. And so I think there are opportunities in our communities to serve, to grow and develop if that's something you want to kind of interact with your like day-to-day career. And I think those things are important. So for me, how that's translated is things like volunteer work. We talked about my sitting volleyball experience. I work with adaptive athletes, adaptive sports here in Baltimore. So I've been able to carry that through into my community. You heard me mention like a nonprofit board work. I think that's another avenue people can go down. And by the way, I think nonprofit board work, a lot of people are interested in this. They don't know how to get started. Nonprofits are looking for great talent and they don't know how to find them. And so I think that that's another, this becomes that platform to have that conversation. The doors, there's so many doors, right? How do we find the door that fits for us? And don't let the noise around us put in question what we are so as individuals able to bring to our lives by just taking one step of discovery, of curiosity, and keep moving.
So let's look at that, the board work and
Yeah.
community building, and I think it's important now, especially as we are being forced into this whole digital this digital age that's not going to go anywhere, is only going to enhance. It's going to be faster, but a lot of people are not in that world. You know what I mean? So uh, people still need that sense of community. And you earlier mentioned one of your pivots was moving.
Yeah.
How were you able to move from one city to another and then still find your lane in community? Give us a couple of secrets, and someone may be listening and they may not even move from a community, but they may be interested in building community and they just need a
Hmm.
couple of tips on what was one of the first things that you did when you
Yeah.
went to the new place?
Well, I love how you put it, of someone may not be moving, but there might be something in there, because I think community is all around us.
Mm,
In the, you asked me about moving. I think that's big community, because everything changes. You need new
yes.
doctors, you need a new grocery store,
yes.
you need you need new friends. You
yes.
need, I mean, think of the stuff that you do in your, you need someone to cut your hair. Like,
Yes.
there's just everything. Community is just totally blown up. So I think a move puts all of that on just like hyperdrive, and it can feel overwhelming, because you're like, where do I begin? But I do think community sits in other places. It sits where we work, it sits where we volunteer,
Mm,
it's literally next door to us. And so I think the first tip, or the first maybe reflection would be a better way to put that out there, is starting with the connecting with the things that are closest to you. I was talking to a friend a few weeks ago about this topic, actually, and she said, we're in a really tough time. People are, trying to figure things out, whether it's their career, whether it's their life. There's just a lot going on in the world. And she's like, especially in the United States, like, we don't even spend time just getting to know our neighbor next door across the street if they need something or they just need a hello. And so community is as simple as that. But I think it's also, let's use a different category, which could be work, right? Who are the people that we work around? We spend a lot of time with these folks. I'm not suggesting you need to be best friends with everyone, but where can you start to find like some common interests, right? Is it a sport that you both enjoy? Is it a food that you both enjoy? And how do you connect on those things, because it brings an enriching experience to your day, and one, being able to get to know someone, but two, maybe it expands your horizons. Like, let's just go with food. You find that person that you enjoy, that also enjoys food. You're like, where'd you eat this weekend? Boom, you just found a new restaurant, right? Something you can connect with. Then you follow that through line. You go to a new restaurant, you try a new food. You want to try that food again. You go to another place, right? It's sort of, you start to see where your web grows. To me, that is also a web of community, the places that we intersect with other humans and interests. So that's the other thing I would share, which is, how do you just kind of connect on simple things and start with that, right? It's often hard to think about building a relationship, especially as adults. As we get older, it becomes harder and harder, because we don't have, the communities aren't shared as much as when you're younger. And so start with something small and give yourself time, right? It takes time to build that relationship. The last thing I'll share, maybe an extension of that, is in taking time and giving yourself grace. When you go to an example like moving, I think you just got to give yourself even more of that. Like, it can feel overwhelming. I think every move I've ever had, I've been excited about it and I've cried. Like, in like, I don't know, month two, like, what did I do? But I have to, now I've moved enough that I have to remind myself, like, it will come, right? There will come a time where the corner turns, but I have to take one step at a time, right? I have to say hi to that neighbor, say hi to them again. I have to go out to lunch with that person at work. Then I have to grab a coffee. And then I have to do like an over the cube chat, like, hey, how's your weekend? I have to go to that sports program down the road that looked really cool. Like, I want to go check out pickleball. What do they got going on over there? Right? These are the things. So maybe I'll surmise with, start with the things that you enjoy and where connections can happen naturally. Start small, give yourself credit and space, and continue to explore. And things will grow over time.
You also mentioned, and I think that this is something important, and I really want us to really focus in on this topic because people are afraid of work. They are afraid of AI, and you bring a wealth of HR experience, and you're seeing, and I'm pretty sure you're hearing all of
Yeah.
these
Oh
fears.
yeah.
If you can give one or two antidotes that to help calm the monkey mind of people, because there's still employment opportunities out there, aren't there?
For sure, for sure. So here's what I would say, and I talk to people a lot about this a lot. In fact, I just did a presentation this week on this. The humanness of work still remains really, really important, right? When you think about, let's go to customer service, like the engagement, the experiences that people have are key. I think about, maybe you go to your local rec center, right? You're not going to just like sort of like blindly check in and scan and just show up, right? You're there to connect, you're there to maybe work out with someone, you're maybe to get have an instructor, right? Those are places and things just to bring like the human experience in. I think human experience also translates to innovation, new ideas, looking at patterns and creating. And so all of those things I think exist in many, many jobs. And so I think a couple of thoughts maybe to offer out there, which would be one, how are you sort of moving with changes? Because I do think AI is integrated in whatever we do. You could say I don't want to get into AI, but the reality is if you Google
You're in
anything today,
it.
you're on
Yeah,
AI,
yeah.
right? And it's been there for a long, long time. It's just we're at a point where we're maybe at a scale of of the term using like augmentation, right? I can use a tool to help support me in delivering a result. And that at work, that's kind of where we're at, right? I'm going to use a tool to maybe make things more efficient, maybe go deeper, help make things, quicker, and so I would encourage people to just kind of dip their toe. I use the phrase AI curious. Be AI curious, right? You don't have to be the person out on the podcast talking about it. You don't have to, give up your data or, push where you're not comfortable, but get in there because it is changing and we're not going back, right? This is one of those periods in life where I don't there won't be an unwiring of this. The other reprieve I think is so much is changing and so much is disruptive. Back to something we started with earlier around being curious and having pivots. I think be open to that, right? For those where their jobs might change a little bit or change a lot, how are you already starting to think about maybe what like that next step is for you? Because you have valuable skills and experience and you have, I'm going to bring it back, that humanness that just AI can't cover, right? AI doesn't have empathy. AI doesn't build relationships, build community. Humans do. And those things remain critical. So maybe it goes back to where we started, which is being open to that pivot and know that you have a lot to bring to the table in your continued career journey. So those are maybe just a couple of things to start with, and I think it's important to reflect on those.
So your position in like in what you do in Baltimore as one of the HR leaders in your community, how do you go about assisting people when they come? Like, what is your role there, and how does that translate in both what we're talking about, community building and um, giving people a sense of assurance that everything is going to really be okay? We've all had to search for work and seemed to couldn't find it. It's, doors
Yep.
seem to be shut in. But you've gotten good at being able to calm people down. And so, what is your role, and how do you see what it is that you bring to the world in that area?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a couple of things. So, you asked me specifically about Baltimore. I'm both in our community in the workforce development board for the city, and I also serve on nonprofit boards. And I think in both cases, the questions that we're asking in those forums is how do we help the people of Baltimore like prepare and build skill sets that enable them to get jobs? And so I think that sits really at the intersection of your question from this and from before, which is how are, in our case, it's about people in Baltimore, but for our listeners, it's themselves. How are you thinking about what's next for you? How are you continuing to build those skills? And how are you using those skills to move you forward in your career path? I know that that sounds so foundational, and perhaps this is the part in transformation that we can hold on to say the building blocks of career moves are still there. What is at the end of that path is what's changing a little bit different. So
Mm,
I think those are the questions that we're asking as we're thinking about Baltimore. I think the other thing that we're asking about is what also gets in the way, right? And so within the city, like there are a lot of barriers for people for job accessibility, transportation, family, like what sort of caretaker are you at home, what other responsibilities do you have, like, right, sort of like basic life things that we all navigate and are even greater when you think about like a metropolitan area like Baltimore. And so I bring this up because at scale, right, we're asking like how do we remove some of those barriers, how do we help support people through that. In my work in Perscalis and that nonprofit board, they literally provide wraparound services. They have like different financing options. They have ways for people to prepare for interviews. They have suits and tailoring that you can to go to your interviews, like all of these things that really help people move forward. I share that because that's kind of what's happening in the city or in the organizations. But if I think about listeners and like, well, then why does that apply to me? I think it comes back to the question of if you're looking to pivot and you're thinking about the future of your career, I think it's also important to say, like, what could get in my way? What could get in the way of my success here?
Yeah.
Is it something like transportation? Is it something like time? Is it accessibility to tools and resources like AI? And then start to ask, like, how do I work through those? Right? Who are the people that are in my network that can support me? What are, free programming in the case of like skill development that I can get to? How do I tap into network, like leveraging things like LinkedIn to find folks that can help support you? Right? I'm just naming a few things, but I think it's important to name the barriers, because when we name the barriers, we can start breaking them down. It's not going to happen overnight, but if we start to explore and to plan for, that's when we also, facilitate more success for ourselves. So that's kind of what we're doing in the community here in Baltimore, and how we're, or at least for my small purview of workforce, but hopefully that helps translate to
No,
folks.
and what you're saying can actually, if you close your eyes and pick the city, it's every city. Those are the same barriers. Those are the barriers that we faced. Not only living in food deserts in some of those areas,
Yep.
having poor transportation availability, and those are built-in excuses. We, you know, I had to retrain my mind to get out of those built-in excuse mechanisms where it's like, oh, it's raining outside, I'm gonna stay home today, or the train, the bus
Yeah.
is, yeah. So, but those are things that need to be discussed because those
Yeah.
are barriers that we can overcome. In end user, the person that we're discussing, those are real fears for them.
Yeah, for
And we
sure.
can't discount those fears. But someone
Yeah.
who doesn't have those fears or who've never lived through those, they're gonna be like, "What do you mean it's raining outside? You couldn't make it?" You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's why, it's a question of like, what are your barriers? What are your things that could get in the way? Because to your points, for someone, you know, literally transportation and getting somewhere, that's a barrier. Whereas for someone else, it might be, I don't know how to rewrite my resume. I've just never thought about it before.
Hmm.
Or maybe someone else is like, hey, I'm the main financial person in my family. I can't afford to be looking for another job because then I'm like taking time away from my job right now and I don't want to put myself at risk. These are just a few other things. But I think everyone has a version of a barrier. Even if the barrier could just also be like, I don't know what I'm doing next, right? So like let's just like run the spectrum. And to your point, I think it's important to name it. I think it's important to recognize it. And I do want to clarify, I don't, and which is also to say, like, there is also recognition that some of these things are really difficult, right? And it's not like this podcast is not like pull up your bootstraps moment and you got this. It's really to also is to acknowledge like there are some things there. And I want to add there are resources and people and communities, right, that can support. And so maybe the follow-on question, in addition to what are the barriers, what are the things that I can tap into that might help start breaking these things down one day at a time.
Because what we're talking about right here, and I think it's very important, me being a mindfulness coach, is transforming thoughts. And transforming thought processes, transforming habits is something that's really, really difficult. And when you're in the workforce, people don't have time to coach you up. Some
Yeah.
entrepreneurs are not, but there are communities such as what you do in Baltimore. And I'm pretty sure there's communities where they are there for that purpose to
Yeah.
help you get back on track. In fact, I'm
Totally.
developing an AI agent, which will be out later this year, called the Pathway Back Agent, and it's doing this very thing. This very thing that we're
Mm,
talking about has resume writing in there, resource tools by zip code,
love it.
all of those things. Because
Yeah.
we're going to have millions of people who has not been working back in the workforce within the next year and a half.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a real thing. And
Yeah.
for someone, as you said, up in those skills, and that's going to be the last question I'll leave you with. For someone who hasn't been in the workforce, doesn't have a resume. That's a scary thing,
Yeah,
and we
it
try
is.
to act like it's not going to happen, but it's going to happen. What are some of the skill sets that you guys are telling people that they should upgrade right now?
Mm. I'm going to share something from we call it a community conversation here in Baltimore. We hosted a dialogue around, or actually around a lot of these topics that we're kicking around, and this very theme came up. So skills that are being discussed that are critical. So one, just some, I'll call them foundational skills, right? Showing up, and I'll call it like doing what you say you're going to do. Follow through, commitment, right? I know in some cases it's easier said than done, but I think these are the things that really not just are baseline, but if you do them consistent, can be differentiators. So I would start there. I think another one is, depending on role, so I'll say this maybe is a little dependent on role, is some of those interpersonal skills, right? Being able to connect with people at a foundational level, right? Just things like if you enter an interview, feeling confident and comfortable around, like, hey, just even expressing like who you are and what you have to offer, all the way up to, building your pitch and leaning in on the skills, right? It depends on kind of where you're at that career space, but I think you're talking about like point of entry.
Yeah, that,
uh,
yeah.
and then I think the last one is like honing your skills. It could be something as simple as I know how to connect with people well, and that's why I'm going to be good at this job, all the way up to most complex of, I have 15, 20 years of like these skill sets that I'm bringing to the table. But I think spending time with yourself around like, what am I good at? What have I been doing? Even if I haven't been in the workforce, right? There's things you're doing in life that can be transferable. And by the way, if you don't know the answers to these questions yourselves, this is where it starts to go to like, let me ask friends, family, like, hey, I'm thinking about getting into the workforce. I'm really struggling with where to begin. Like, what do you see in me that you think I could like bring to the world? Like, what do you think's my gift? So I think those might be some ways to begin. So it's, core around do what you say and be able to commit, have some of those like basic kind of like interpersonal skills, and then understand who you are and what you can bring to the workforce so that you can showcase those when you're interviewing and when you're showing up on day one. I'm going to underscore all of this, which is, I think, what you heard me say throughout that, which is tapping into your resourcing. And I know everyone has different access to different resources, but know that there's folks out there, there's programs out there, people to tap into that can help along the way. So, yeah, be curious, be confident, go forth, right? We're all in it. We're all just trying to figure it out.
Thank you so much. This has been a refreshing conversation, and I think a much needed conversation because although usually I'm talking to coaches or entrepreneurs, and there's still people that may not go that path. That path is not for everyone, and to have a
Yeah.
conversation just showing the person that that may be listening and just afraid to get back out there that it's possible. So I really really appreciate you going on podcast and being a coach in that area and giving people a sense of hope because that's what's really needed right now in America.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to connect. And I'll also offer if people do want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn. I always offer to continue to have these conversations because I do think we need networks and we need people. And sometimes we just need to think out loud and ask a few more questions. So happy to offer that. But I agree with you in the bigger scheme of things. We're in the middle of one big workforce pivot, but we can all get there together. Keep with your community, keep curious, and be yourself, right? And keep moving forward. So I wish all your listeners the best, and I certainly really appreciate the time to have the dialogue.
There you have it, everybody. I told you we set you at the feet of the masters. Listen, we don't ask you for cash apps, Venmos, Apple Pays, or any of those things. They would be great, but our gift to you is these conversations. But what we do ask is that you follow our guest and Carlee's on LinkedIn and go and follow or get these tips. If you have any questions, let her know where you come from, and that you hit like, subscribe, and share. Also, leave a comment. Those comments are vital to the growth of the podcast because it helps these conversations get to the ears of people that need to hear them. Don't walk with your head down. Don't walk making excuses. You're part of the Walk in Victory family. Carlee now has joined the family, and together we walk in victory. Enjoy the rest of your day. Peace.